You're listening to LVB Podcast Show with your friend, advocate, and host, Alvaro.
Hi and welcome to LVB Show. My name is Alvaro and I'm very happy to be with you tonight. Before I introduce our guest, I want to say thank you so much to people listening from the United States, from Canada, from Europe, from Africa, from Latin America, and everywhere else where they are listening to the show. If you want to be on the show, you can email me as always at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at lowvisionbureau, and you can find the show on YouTube. Okay, so tonight we have Michiel from Belgium. He is the founder of a wonderful project called ICE. This is AYES. This is a very powerful mobile application for the blind that is being developed as we speak. So, Michiel, how are you doing in Belgium today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me on your podcast. The weather is a little bit chilly here, as opposed to the weather in Colombia, I assume. But in general, I'm doing perfect. Thank you.
That is wonderful to hear. And for our listeners, can you tell us how did this wonderful project start?
Yeah, sure. So actually, we started, or I started the company together with two other co-founders early this year. So from January on, we've been working part-time on this project besides the full-time job that we had back then. And then since the beginning of July, actually, we started with the three of us full-time working on the project. So we all quit our jobs to go for ICE. And basically the reason why we started, so the three co-founders all have a technical background. And then we have a family friend who is blind. And we started thinking, especially in the COVID times, he had less opportunities to go outside due to not having his assistant around or other relatives. And then we started thinking, hey, we all have a computer vision, so an artificial intelligence background. Can't we develop something that will help our friend in need? He's called Bram. If you want to know that as well, that's a little bit personal, but it makes it way more easier to understand the story. So yeah, basically we wanted to help out Bram with our invention, or what we thought that would be helping blind and visually impaired. And then we saw, okay, we started analyzing the global visually impaired market, and we started thinking there are so many people having the same issues around mobility or challenges when walking up down the street. And that's one of the main reasons why we started the company.
So, Michiel, what is the idea? What is going to do the application for us?
Yes, sure. So we're heavily oriented on a software approach. So we deliver a mobile application. And what we do is basically, in a nutshell, it's smarter navigation to guide blind and visually impaired from A to B. And we call it a live navigational assistant. But basically on a global level, and probably our audience will use GPS maps or relevant technologies. But GPS in general isn't accurate enough to guide you completely from A to B. And what we do is we leverage the smartphone's camera, and we use that while walking down the street. And what we can do, if you use your smartphone while walking the streets, we can capture the environment. We can perceive what's going on in your environment. For example, you're walking down a sidewalk, but there's some sort of obstacle on the sidewalk. We can detect that and we can guide you around it. But we can also guide you through safe crossing conditions. And what do we mean by safe crossing conditions? we can determine where the crosswalk is or where it's safe to cross. But we can also detect if there is a pedestrian traffic light and what the state of the traffic light is, either green or red. And by combining all those visual information that we can capture locally while walking with a global GPS path, we want to guide blind and visually impaired basically way more smarter from A to B. And in terms of feedback, currently we're providing audio feedback, so audio cues to guide you along obstacles, to guide you through a green light. But in general, we're a young company, so we're also thinking about other feedbacks, for example, haptic feedback. So it's still not completely determined if it will be audio or haptic or a combination of the two.
Michael, this seems very exciting. I have many questions in my head right now that I'm gonna ask you. But before I do that, if you ask me, I have been an international disability advocate for so many years. I have worked in New York City, and I know, I feel I know a little bit what we need as a community. In my view, if you ask me and for our listeners, I think a combination of both would be better, if you ask me. In my view, Michael, for me particularly, I prefer the guidance of a voice, if you ask me. If it says go to the right, it's better for me than sounds or vibrations. That is just me talking. So if you have the ability to say to the user, what do you prefer? I think would be nice. Because sometimes people decide for us. You know what I mean, Michael? Because
for sure, yeah. I mean, that's the whole reason indeed why we are talking with so many users, because we, especially from a technical background, we think like, hey, this can be an ideal way of working or way of feedback. But in general, indeed, the people having the visual disability are the ones that need to provide relevant feedback in order to iterate over our product and get it better in the end for them. That's completely true. I agree on that.
Right. And what happens, Michael, I'm going to give you and our listeners an example. I knew someone here in Colombia who had a Japanese device. It was about $15,000. So obviously not many people could afford it, right? So that was not truly smart. But this device worked without any voice guiding you. So everything was sound related. And some blind people said it's not working for me. This is not good enough for me. I need voice assistance because it's the way my hearing works of whatever, maybe I'm used to that information, So it's truly important to keep your, what you're doing in asking people around you and everywhere in the world to see what the majority says. But I bet people are going to say, you know what, if you can give us the two options, it's going to be better than one, So, okay, so going in depth into this, I'm going to assume that we can maybe do an example here, like I'm walking from McDonald's to my house. When you say, Michael, that your goal is to help people go from point A to point B more accurately than what a GPS can do, can you explain how you achieve that?
Yeah, sure. So what we as a company envision is basically, for example, as you mentioned, going from McDonald's back to your home. Whenever you open our app, you would be able to put your destination. And like a normal GPS app, we would calculate a certain route to your home, which is already safe, but not good enough for guiding pedestrians and more especially blind and visually impaired. And what we do by leveraging the camera stream or the camera input, we can, for example, the GPS says in 100 meters, you need to go left, for example. That's a certain waypoint in the route. And along your way, in the 100 meters that you need to go straight, there will be probably some sort of obstacles that you need to avoid that we can detect by leveraging the camera input. Our AI models will detect all the relevant objects as well in order to guide you along this path. So basically what we aim for is a local improvement of the path that you're walking through. But moreover, as I mentioned, for example, you need to go in 100 meters left and you need to cross at an intersection as well. So you need to cross a crosswalk. Our software detects where the crosswalk is as well and what the orientation is of the crosswalk. So that's also really important that we can guide you not only more accurately through the crosswalk, but also guide you along the crosswalk. So what the orientation is, because I imagine in some countries that the crosswalk is not always perpendicular to the road, but can also have some sort of angle, which makes it more complicated for blind and visually impaired. So that's that. And more recent, what our current prototype is the detection of pedestrian traffic lights. We call it Traffic Light Buddy. But basically what that is capable of, whenever you arrive at an intersection, your camera will detect the pedestrian traffic light state, and you will hear an audible sound to know whether it's red or green, and you know whether it's safe to cross. So that's the first iteration and prototype that we currently have. But generally speaking, the vision is way bigger, and it's way more than only detecting pedestrian traffic lights. So to recap, it's on a high level GPS, but locally we use computer image recognition techniques to guide you along this path and refine the path as well, to keep you always on the sidewalk, guide you through safe crossing conditions, and then eventually guide you back home more safely.
Michael, it's very interesting what you say. I have a question. Is your technology able to detect doors? I'm going to give you an example. When you use a GPS application, sometimes you get to about maybe 10, 15 feet of your destination. Yeah. And sometimes we find maybe 3 doors, and we don't know which one is the right one. So how can your technology help in that regard? For instance, if it says red door or it says blue door, it's going to help tremendously, because in many cases we know that our destination has a blue door because someone has told us before, or we have a little bit of sight and we are able to distinguish that. So how can you help in that regard of doors in terms of getting to your destination exactly?
Yeah, sure. That's a question that's been already asked quite often by our users. But in general, so AI or computer vision, which is a technique behind the whole app, can be used for a tremendous amount of use cases. So currently we're focusing on the richer, making the app that we currently have more richer, as mentioned, by detecting sidewalk, crosswalk, pedestrian traffic lights. But indeed, there is indeed the opportunity to go even further, because detecting something in a picture isn't that hard. It's just a matter of time and the team behind it to do the job, basically. So detecting doors or buttons or even animals, those things are definitely possible, but it's a matter of timing, basically, from our end, and how many users think that's also relevant. because it's not that we can completely optimize our algorithms for each individual. We want
Right.
to have a global overview. What are the features that are the most demanded by, yeah, let's say the majority, and then we go from that point. But basically, to answer your question, that's definitely possible and very much feasible to detect doors or other interesting objects that our end users are interested in.
Michael, let me try to understand better the
Mhm.
perspective or going from point A to point B more accurately than GPS again. Let's
Yeah.
say we type our destination. How can artificial intelligence and your technology help improve the distance difference between a GPS that has 5 feet or 6 feet of inaccuracy compared to your technology? How can you make sure it's better than GPS normal?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's also I thinking along the timeline. So we first want to assist you along the path from A to B, and then indeed, as you mentioned, there's another challenge. Whenever you reach your destination B, for example, your home, there's still indeed the 5 or 6 feet in inaccuracy. And there we think as well that computer vision can help you. For example, as you mentioned, you already or maybe not already know what the end location will look like. For example, a blue door, then we can detect such stuff as well. But if it would be completely a random place that you've never been to, then it becomes a little bit harder to anticipate on what visuals we can find there or cues that we can use in order to yeah, improve the accuracy of the 5 and 6 feet. Um, but in general, we've been thinking, and that's a brainstorming that we recently had, that maybe, for example, you're walking to the McDonald's, but you've never been there before, that the McDonald's itself um, get a certain notification um, that a certain user is coming to the store, and that can be or that is in need for assistance, let's say, so that a certain person from the store can go outside and see, okay, hey, this person, he wants to come to McDonald's to get food or whatever. That's a brainstorming session that we had recently. So it's not a fixed thing, and we've been asking our end users as well, what do you think about this idea? And some of them like it, some of them don't, because in the end, you just want to be truly independent and you don't want to disturb other people. But that's also one brainstorming session that we had on how we can improve yeah, the inaccuracy at your end destination besides the visual information that we get from the scene.
Okay, very, very interesting technology. Okay, more questions. How do you need to position your device in order for the camera to do a good job when you are walking down the streets?
Yeah, for optimal use, it would be around the, more or less around your chest,
Okay,
because we've noticed, and we've noticed with our friend Bram actually, he points his head always more or less down or left or right, and we've noticed that the chest is a really a stable positioning on your body
okay,
that goes where you're walking. So your body always goes where you're walking, and that's a big plus. And that's one of the reasons why we aim for the location of the smartphone more or less around the chest. So you can either put your phone literally on your body, on your chest, or you can hold it a little bit before your body. But it's also a good thing, and I think that's the right timing for it as well. A lot of users has been asking, "Hey, it's rather hard to hold my phone while walking. I already have a guide dog, a white cane, or other things to carry with." And that's also part of the vision from day one, that we want to either develop or buy something off the shelf a chest strap
Right.
where you can attach your smartphone to, so that we can deliver a hands-free solution, but still have the same software that you would have if you would be holding your phone in your own hands. But what makes it more interesting, the chest strap, what we envision is that it will consist of a battery component as well to charge your phone while walking, which is also a request that we hear a lot. And then besides the battery module, we also envision that we can put some sort of haptic motors or even speakers into the chest strap, so that you have, for example, you feel your left shoulder vibrating, and then you know I need to go, for example, a little bit to the left or just turn my body to the left. And the same applies for your right shoulder, but it's still not determined, and it's still in that sense a dream, but that's part of the vision at ICE, that we want to deliver a hands-free solution for our end users.
Very important what you talk about. Will it work on the subway, for instance?
In the subway, for navigation, you mean? Or
yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that also brings me to another part of our vision, which I didn't mention yet, but that's also the good time. So basically, AI models require quite some compute power of your phone, and some companies leverage a certain cloud service to get a request. For example, to put it as an example, you take an image of something and you want to detect a dog in it. So either what you can do is option A, you can send your photo to a cloud service. He will perform the image recognition, and the output will be sent back over cellular or Wi-Fi connection, and you will hear, I detected a dog or a cat. But what we aim for is that all the knowledge and all the software, all the intelligence is locally on your smartphone. So you don't need to have the Wi-Fi or cellular connection to get requests from and back to the server. So basically, our example as the cat and dogs detection happens all locally on the smartphone itself. And that's really important. And that we had positive feedback already from clients that we talked to, that it's really important to not rely on good Wi-Fi or cellular connection.
Right.
And that puts it into the question, will it work in the subway? In terms of visual recognition, it definitely will. But indoor mapping is something completely different than outdoor mapping,
right,
or outdoor navigation. So certain things will definitely work due to not relying on a certain cellular connection, but it will depend on, probably will only suffice that we can detect certain things like a button, a door, but really guiding you through a certain path will be a little bit more difficult, since we don't have the indoor mapping of the subway or any other building.
Right. It's definitely a technology in development that it has wonderful promises, and your application is going to help us so much, I have to say. Mm-hmm. Okay, I have so many things in my mind. Because artificial intelligence has always been a great tool, in my view, for the future, and the future is now, so. Okay, I have a question. If you take always the same bus, or you take always the same subway train, mm-hmm. and you arrive always at the same subway station, mm-hmm. and you arrive always at the same bus station, would it be a way to mark, to kind of create some places that you can know virtually that, that it's a place you have been in, because the application is going to make a noise, like it's going to tell you you have been here, and
Yeah.
some kind of notice, that notification of somehow lets you know that you've been there and you can get more comfortable understanding where to go from there. I'm not sure if I'm asking right the question, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I see where you're going, and indeed, like we experience it well. Some of them, of some of the blind and visually impaired, like to do the same routes. But in general, our vision is to also support new routes. For you, you can go to a certain location where you're not familiar with.
Right.
But in general, indeed, as you mentioned, and it's a fair point, for people that are just wanting to do certain routes, our machine learning models or computer vision can also assist you in maybe in some sort of way virtual recording your walk from that specific location A to B,
Right.
and then learning as well along the way. Like it's some sort of mapping your route
Right.
specific to the user, but then whenever you're about to do the same walk, for example, day to day, our computer vision models will still need to run to detect obstacles that weren't there yesterday and maybe aren't there tomorrow again. But it keeps us, the virtual mapping is definitely a thing that we're thinking about. That could be potentially a good use case to implement, and probably a good feature that our users want. So that definitely it's an idea that we've been thinking about as well.
Michael, another question comes to mind. If I walk in, let's say in the streets of New York, a city that I know fairly well,
Mhm.
will this application say out loud names of stores I'm passing by?
Currently, it doesn't. I mean, we're still in a rather short in our first prototyping phases. But we hear that a lot as well, like Blind Square is doing or Soundscape. Those functionalities, or at least by some of them, are really valuable to know where you at on your route, let's say.
Yes.
So definitely that could be a potential thing that could be implemented. But we need to see by time if that will be the eventual use case that we are going to deliver. But that's we've been thinking about it as well, as I mentioned. And yeah, we will definitely keep it in mind into our development phases in the coming months.
Yes, Michael, because let me put you an example. I am walking and I get to a restaurant and it has a flashy light and everything, and I don't see what's the name of the restaurant. But if I point my camera to the restaurant's entrance, it says John's Restaurant. And I'd say, oh, this is the one. This is the
Yeah.
one. I found it. And if I see around and the camera detects a McDonald's and I am lost, I am able to say to a friend, look, I am in front of a McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
And I think by the GPS information it's giving me, maybe I'm in 34th Street. So that's going to help us tremendously, you know?
But I think that's maybe probably in such case it's like upon request that you want to have this feature, or do you want to also have it along your walk, like every store or restaurant or bar that you're walking past?
Well,
Is that
I mean,
interesting as
well,
well, or?
Michael, if it is a wish list, I I say, of course, if you
Mhm.
can walk and you can point the camera to the right and it says hairdresser and it goes to the right and it says church, etc., it's going to be a wonderful way of getting points of interest for you to get along and to understand where you're going and where are you at.
Yeah.
But if the technology is very complicated to implement, at least to work in a certain way. Maybe not as powerful as I am describing, but a little bit, it would be fine. Anything that can give us the information around us in a way that we can use artificial intelligence to point the phone to a certain location and it says, what is that place? That's a game changer for us,
Yeah, exactly. I completely understand. Yeah. So yeah, it's on our wish list, let's say it.
Okay, I have another question.
Yeah, sure.
Will this system work when it's dark outside?
Yeah. So in general, we've been collecting for artificial intelligence. Let's start off with some background. For artificial intelligence, you need to have a lot of data, and in our case, it's photos or videos taken on the street, on the sidewalk, on the crosswalk, of pedestrian traffic lights. So in general, what we need is a lot of data in specific countries. And we've been collecting a lot of data in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, France, and Switzerland already. And that's why it's the perfect time for that as well. We're developing a second mobile application called Data Hero. And what is Data Hero? We want to rely on volunteers, both people around blind and visually impaired or just random volunteers out there in the world that want to collect data in the region where he or she is located. And by just walking on the sidewalk or just whenever you're walking in the streets, he or she can take his smartphone out. They can start collecting data, so imagery data, and they can upload the data through our servers. And that's very valuable for our company to process the data. So our machine learning or just in general artificial intelligence becomes way more smarter, and we can scale to other countries. So that's really important to know that if we want to deliver our services in other countries, we want to have data in that country as well. So that's one thing, but in general, it works in night as well. We've been collecting data during in the night as well in Belgium a lot, and so it works in those conditions. But for optimal use, we advise, especially in the stage that we are, to use it in daylight. But it works at night indeed, and it will be working even better if we have the community around us to collect data for us, and then they have impact on visually impaired, and we can give visually impaired better services.
Michael, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
What is artificial intelligence? And yes, because our listeners may not know.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for sure.
And the other question is, why do you need information from countries if artificial intelligence itself can detect things as well? This is a very powerful question, I know, but I think it's important for people to realize how this new technology works.
Yeah, sure. So in general, artificial intelligence, it's just machine intelligence for a computer. But in our case, it's more computer vision. And what is computer vision? It's basically analyzing a certain image and detecting a lot of stuff. For example, a chair, a glass, the sidewalk, a pedestrian light. So it's more or less mimicking what a sighted person can see as well with his own eyes. And that's also why the name EYES, it stands for artificial eyes. It's an artificial intelligence based eyes that keeps an eye on your walks. So that's basically what artificial intelligence is. And in order to become intelligent for a machine, you need to have data. And in our case, that's images and video. And why then specific data from specific countries? You can imagine that the infrastructure, the sidewalk, the crosswalk and the pedestrian traffic light, for example, is completely different in Belgium than it is in Colombia, and then vice versa as well in the US or in South America or South Africa. It's a completely different infrastructure,
Right.
and each region, yeah, sets its own infrastructure as well, and that's necessary for the artificial intelligence, and it's a specific term what we call generalize, and that's the key dream of artificial intelligence. You want to generalize of all the data that you've been seen, to generalize enough to unseen new situations that you may encounter while, in this case, walking down the streets.
Oh, I understand. This is fascinating for our listeners.
I think so as well.
Okay, so more questions. How about at the airport? How could this help us get to the restaurant or the bathroom? How do you envision things like this at a busy airport?
Mhm. So yeah, our main vision, especially as of today, is outdoor navigation. And then it's a completely different task, as we mentioned as well in with the subway story.
Mhm.
But that's also this case with airports or other busy places. Navigation or GPS in general becomes inaccurate at all whenever you're in a building. So you really need to rely then on either some sort of company that already mapped out the airport, for example, and then it becomes feasible to use GPS again. But whenever you don't have that, it becomes way harder, and then you need to have the visual information that we are developing as well. But in general, indoor navigation is a little bit out of scope for us at the moment. But it can be very interesting to, in the coming years, let's say, to develop even more features that we can also assist blind and visually impaired indoors. But it's a way more challenging task than outdoor already is in its own. But definitely things can be done there. Um, but that requires some different technology. There are some companies, and we've already been talking to a Dutch company in the Netherlands. They have an application for indoor navigation, but what they did is they went with a 360 camera to that specific place, and they took from all different places within the building a 360 image, and by doing so you can make some sort of map of an indoor environment, and then you can guide yourself within that map. But it becomes way less scalable
Right, right,
than
right,
we are aiming for. We
right,
don't want to fly to Colombia, for example, to Bogota to map your street before delivering our services. We
right.
just want to rely on the community to take pictures here and there, and then it generalizes well enough, becomes more scalable, and more users can start using it way quicker. But I think we can also rely on the technology and the advances that are making in AI in general. So probably in the coming years, maybe indoor navigation will be way more easy to do. But yeah, that's a little bit dependent on where the technology goes, or what we as a company are developing in house.
Michael, do you have a date, approximately a date, to release an application for iPhone or Android?
Yes, so I talked about it a little bit. So currently we are developing two apps. One is for data collection, and we plan to roll that out globally, hopefully in September. And then there's the app which is assisting blind and visually impaired to cross through the traffic light state recognition. And then you'll hear an audible beep to know whether it's green or red. That will be tested probably this month already in Belgium, the Netherlands. And that's the main reason we don't want to scale too quickly to other countries, and especially across borders and internationally, before having the data in your region. And that's the main reason why we started developing this second app, to first collect data, for example, in Bogota, and then retrain our models, and then send out the traffic light detection app. So basically, we are almost testing in some countries in Europe, but they will hopefully follow quite soon. But it depends on the community that we want to build to collect data.
Now, please go ahead.
In terms of iOS, there is a big reason why we are currently developing in iOS. So first, and probably you know as well, iOS or Apple in general focuses a lot on accessibility.
Right.
So that's what we think is really important as well for our users, that they can use our app in an accessible way. But then there's a second thing, as quickly mentioned as well in this podcast. I've said that artificial intelligence requires a certain compute power of your smartphone. And Apple is really pushing the boundaries there to optimize for those specific artificial intelligence models. And Android is a little bit lacking behind. But we do foresee that we, in the coming months, are going to develop the same traffic light detection app in Android to see whether it's feasible to deliver the same services that we aim for and that we are planning for on iOS. So it's dependent on timing and both on the hardware infrastructure that Android brings along.
Okay, so when it comes to the complete application that does the traffic light detection and does even more things, when do you see that happening as a complete application coming up?
Yeah, we foresee that will be probably somewhere in more or less mid 2022. So we still have some development to do and data being collected by the community. But in general, there are still some steps that we as a company need to make. But we first want to have the traffic light app out there to receive a lot of feedback.
Right.
We are planning for audio feedback at the moment, but we can also switch to haptic feedback because your phone can also vibrate.
Right.
Or there's an option to choose between the two or a combination of the two. So I think those things will require time from our end to develop it, but also get feedback from testers being in Europe or across the globe. So we aim for mid 2020 or next summer to do the final release and to deliver the final product, basically.
Michael, I need to ask you about the financials of this, because this takes a lot of people to develop, millions of hours of work, etc.
Yeah. Yes.
How much is going to cost the application? Can you tell?
We don't have an exact number on it since we're in an early stage. But what the business model, in a sense, is that you just download the app in the App Store and pay a certain subscription fee per month, and it will be cheaper if you buy a yearly subscription. But in general, it depends on what the value actually is that we can deliver. but it will be around between, I don't know, yeah, what we think for is that you have a basic version, for example, an application that provides basic navigation plus, for example, a traffic light detector. And then you have a more premium subscription where you also can do more, for example, the local obstacle avoidance and other features that we planned for. So that means that there will be a cheap version and a little bit more expensive version, but more or less to give you a price region, it will be between 5 to 20 euros a month.
Okay, perfect. So, Michael, do you have any final thoughts?
Let's think. Because I saw one of your questions that the application will be rolled out in Spanish as well. That's
Oh,
a good
yes.
question. That's also a good question, I think, for your listeners. Currently, all the information or the text in our app is in English to target as many as possible. But indeed, there will be the time to really implement other languages as well: French, Dutch, English, Spanish, and probably Spanish because that's the second biggest language after English. But definitely that's on the timeline for us to deliver our app in different languages. And in general, I think we as a company want to put our foot as well in other countries, and it's really nice that you contacted us because you were actually the first in South America to contact us. So I think it would be, in terms of delivering our solution way faster to the community, so to the blind community, we would encourage the listeners or relatives around them to start whenever it's ready, to start using and start collecting data, and then eventually upload your data in our Data Hero app. That would be fantastic. So we really rely and hope to have a lot of users helping blind and visually impaired out there. Even if you don't know someone, you have already a big impact on a daily life of a blind and visually impaired person.
Michael, how can people become a volunteer for that application?
Yeah, so we plan to roll out the application hopefully in September. That will be through the App Store from Apple. So yeah, every volunteer out there can basically go to the App Store and download it. And maybe, but yeah, that's maybe a little bit less relative. We plan to do some sort of beta testing before deploying it in the actual App Store. So if people want to test it already sooner, they can apply on our website. There is a Join Our Pilot Program button, which brings you in contact with us. And it can be either a blind person willing to test out the traffic light app, or a sighted volunteer or whoever wanting to collect more data for us. So you can sign up with that button for the two applications.
All right, perfect. Michael, please stay a little bit longer after we finish this talk, because I have 2 or 3 ideas for you.
Super.
Okay, so Michael, it's been a great pleasure to bring you on the show. Fascinating technology. It's the first time I talk about artificial intelligence in such a powerful way with someone. Thank you for everything you're doing, Michael.
Yeah, no problem. It was a pleasure meeting you as well, Rafael. And I hope our listeners I understand everything I said in terms of the technology. And yeah, hope to talk to you guys soon.
Sure. And for our listeners, remember, if you want to be on the show, you can email me at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at lowvisionbureau. So this is Alvaro from LVB Show saying good night.